and thank you to everyone for your attendance and to the Textile Society of America. More, yeah, okay. Is that better? Like so? Thank you. At the time of the early confrontations between indigenous Andeans and the Spanish conquistadors who were pressing into their lands, the Catholic Church in Europe was itself beset with threats to its dominion. Between 1545 and 1563, the Council of Trent debated, among other doctrinal matters, the place of images in church dogma and the significance these would have in consolidating the Catholic faith. As the Council affirmed the importance of imagery for indoctrination, so too did the Spanish Crown see the potential of images within the colonial project. As Kenneth Mills points out in an essay on religious imagination in the Andean colonies, the painted saints that found their way into the colonial context were figurations of a triumphant Spanish self-image that, with its heavy investment in piety and intercession, not to mention battle-worn righteousness, had been honing itself throughout the period of the Reconquista. In the context of the New World, images of martyred saints and saints such as St. James seen here, the Virgin and Jesus Christ, accompanied the church-sanctioned Spanish armies both as protective emblems and as evangelizing tools that would reform native populations through Christian education. The ritual particularized attention to saints' devotion meant that the church could control how the Catholic religion was experienced. There were rules for how saints were to be venerated and their images circulated, and soon after the conquest, official inspectors were on hand to ensure that local practice did not deviate from official purpose. Attention to saints was presumably not located in the biographies of the saints per se, but in typology and how a saint's life corresponded to lives of saints prior and ultimately to the life of Christ. Paintings of saints decorated churches and private spaces in Spain, and they would do the same in the viceroyalties of the Americas. One well-known transmitter of saint imagery was the Spanish Tenebris painter Francisco de Zurbarán, who was well known for a series of virgin saints, copies of which made their way to the South American colonies. Suzanne Stratton-Pruitt notes that churches in Bogotá and Lima commissioned groups of this painting type from his studio during the mid-1600s. While Zurbarán's works might have set a template for virgin saint iconography in the colonies, however, the transmission of a European style would be variable and fragmentary, echoing Kenneth Mill's description of the transmission of Catholic belief on the whole within the colonial context. In the transcultural exchange, no matter the intention or construal of the church and its extensions, there was no singular mode for infusion of Catholic dogma, and likewise there was no singular mode of receiving Catholicism. As were many of the figures in the tradition of virgin saint imagery, the young woman in this colonial Peruvian painting, dated to the late 17th or early 18th century, is presented in full figure pose, extending the palm frond that is iconographic of female saints' martyrdom. There are curiosities, however, that immediately come forward. Lifted by the wind, the skein of undone mauve drapery trailing behind her offsets the ample garments that ground her. Planted in the blue-green landscape, we perceive her as a figure both arriving and having arrived, offering more questions than answers in this swirl of presence. Ever virtuous, she holds a prayer book in her left hand, but there is not much in the way of specification as to which virgin martyr she may be. Nonetheless, there are a couple of possibilities regarding her identity that are worth considering. One of the stronger leads which I pursue here is her resonance with Saint Casilda, one of the many female saints painted by Zurbarán. Among the first of its type, painted during his flourishing career in Seville, Zurbarán's Saint Casilda may be loosely linked to the Peruvian painting of the unknown Virgin Martyr for several reasons. At the end of the 16th century in the Iberian Peninsula, the lives of local saints received particular historical as well as literary attention, and Saint Casilda, patron saint of Burgos, was among those whose narratives was circulated in hagiographies and theatrical performances. Though she was considered a lesser female saint, her association with the Reconquest may have been particularly interesting in the period of Iberian incursion into the Americas, when Christianity encountered a new counterpart to the historical infidel. Saint Casilla's father was an 11th century Muslim king of Toledo, but she converted to Christianity and displayed her Christian virtue by smuggling food to Christian prisoners jailed under her father's rule. She would have therefore resonated greatly in the newly Christianized New World as an exemplar of Christian faith, withstanding the influence of a prior, unsanctioned religiosity. Allusions to the conquest of the Muslims were frequently made in relation to indigenous peoples in both Mesoamerican and South American colonial spaces. In their countenance, too, we may begin to draw comparison, or perhaps we can do this with the color and form of their hair. We can also link the two images through iconographic traits in their costume. In both Zurbarán's painting of Saint Casilla and the colonial Peruvian unnamed Virgin Martyr, the figures wear similar bejeweled diadems, for example. This would suggest that Saint Casilla of Muslim royalty, the unknown Virgin, suggest that like Casilla of Muslim royalty, the unknown Virgin Martyr comes from a wealthy background. More notably, their costumes display the same cloisonné brooch holding a dark green gem encircled by small pearls. These features may be enough to tenuously link the two figures, but it seems odd that the unknown Virgin's particular advocacy should be unclear. As the statue of the Virgin Mary increased within the Church, the lesser saints developed cults according to their reputations, and so particular and identifiable attributes would have been quite relevant, all the more so in the context of the colonizers' evangelizing program. But there's another interpretive route I would like to follow in the exercise of transposing Saint Casilla onto this unspecified Virgin Martyr. It may lead us to look more closely at the unknown Virgin Martyr's unique skirt and contextualize it, as well as her, within a particularly Andean cultural complex. A late 16th century hagiography of Saint Casilla recounts that the saint secretly hid food in her gathered skirt to take to Christian prisoners. When caught in this subterfuge, she tells her father that rather than food, she is carrying roses, which miraculously appear instead of the bread she had been carrying. Her skirt then, both before and after her father's discovery, is a source of bounty or of fecundity of some kind, bread as in nourishment, or flowers as in fertility. She bears both. A preliminary reading of the two paintings might lead us to infer that the rendition of the Peruvian Virgin Martyr does not quite carry the same symbolic weight. The flowers in this artwork appear instead as stylized motifs along horizontal bands at the midpoint and bottom hem of the figure's skirt. Through a Europeanized reading of form and representation, they are disparate depictions. One figure holds figural flowers, while the other wears the abstraction of flowers. We may identify an interesting correspondence between the two Virgin models, yet simultaneously a chasm of difference seems to open up before us. Have we reached a dead end with the comparison of the two dead saints? It is possible that for a colonial Spanish viewer of this painting, the content of the painting diminishes at this point. However, in the Andes, we can understand the textile skirt and its motifs quite differently, in such a way as to expand again the painting's dynamic content. Native Andeans had been weaving camelid and cotton textiles for thousands of years before the Spanish invaders were ever seen ascending the steep paths of the highlands. Predominant carriers of symbolic content in a region that did not develop alphabetic script, Andean textiles visually communicate a vast amount of information about the wearer, his or her origins, ethnic and geographic associations, as well as in many cases, sacred practices. For the Inca Empire that immediately preceded the Spanish imposition, society was structured through sight, and textiles as objects whose production could be regulated and whose finished state was mobile and highly visible were critical. In these early 17th century images, the indigenous author and illustrator Felipe Huamapoma de Ayala documents the value of weaving as labor and how clothing becomes a factor of aggression in battle. Specifically, and in a manner that we may refer back to the painting of the unknown Virgin Martyr, Indigenous woven textiles strongly invoke the Andean landscape and its productive capacity. For example, an Andean woman's yikya, or mantle, can be said to manifest social relationships involved in various production processes. The yikya is an iteration of native Andeans' deep attachment to land and cycles of production and reproduction, which can be extrapolated to implicate authority and political attachment, as well as, in some instances, cosmographic references. As Marianne Hogue notes, weaving was used as a metaphor for farming by the Inca. They referred to it as weaving the land. The broad bands of solid color here, for example, called pampas, are associated with open, uncultivated land, whereas the bordering design areas are called payay and are associated with the production and cultivation of goods, or are otherwise references to a culturated space. In late 16th and early 17th century Quechua dictionaries, the word pampa is translated variously as open space, communal space, or flat space, while payay derives from the verb payañay, which translates as to harvest or to lift from the ground. With this understanding, we might reconsider the comparison of Zurbarán's painting of Saint Casilda holding the flowers and the seemingly abstract flowers on the unknown Virgin Martyr's skirt. However, it should be noted that there are notable formal discrepancies in trying to read her outfit as a woman's indigenous textile garment. For example, even though the horizontal bands at the skirt's base adhere to the Andean highland custom that equates horizontal orientation with female design, the pattern of vertical lines that also appears inserts an incongruous masculine design element. In Andean textile terms, the woman's dress seems to code both masculine and feminine properties. Furthermore, although the skirt's color and schematic design point to indigenous woven cloth, the fact that the garment is tailored to form a skirt distances it from the traditional pre-Hispanic indigenous practice. A loom created pre-Hispanic highland textile would not have been cut from the loom or tailored. Textiles were woven directly on the loom according to size and design specifications, with no further adjustments made besides the stitched seams, which would close the garment around the body, in the case of male tunics, or match two panels of a shawl in certain highland traditions. Nonetheless, I argue it is still possible to understand the Virgin Martyr's skirt within an Andean textile idiom and recognize that, in fact, she carries the abundance of the earth with fields awaiting harvest upon her being. Furthermore, scholars point to the similarity between the geometric motifs called tocapu, seen on Inca male tunics, and the motifs in the horizontal bands of this Virgin Martyr's skirt. It is not certain exactly what information tocapu relayed, but they often seem to suggest divisions that correlate to ways the Inca organized territorial space. The Inca emphasized spatial organization in terms of duality and quadripartition, as seen particularly, for example, in many of the tocapu on this well-known male tunic, thought to have been the garment of a very elite Inca noble, if not the ruler himself. The male tunic's multiplicity of tocapu lays out an ordering system. As Rebecca Stone points out, amidst the frenzy of motifs, the only two tocapu designs to be replicated most often are two that can be most clearly associated with facets of Inca power: the Inca key pattern, often linked to Inca administrative divisions, and a checkerboard pattern, often linked to military force. If Andean textiles evoke territory or landscape, they also invariably had a sacred dimension, since a significant aspect of local belief systems is the acknowledgement that Andeans inhabit a sacred geography. We see a reference to this in documents created by the 16th century extirpator of idolatry, Arriaga. In a questionnaire he extended to Andean inhabitants, their nervous attention to the living landscape is palpable. Quote, "What is the name of the principal idol? Is it a peak, a cliff, or a small stone? Does it have children who are also stones, a father, a brother, or a wife? Which idols are worshipped for the fields, which for the maize, the potatoes, and the livestock?" Unquote. This photograph shows a stone altar created in reverence to the hill behind it, called Wanakaudi, which was thought to be the stone embodiment, the Wauki, of the first Inca ruler's brother. Again, to return to the unknown virgin martyrs woven skirt, a textile read in Andean terms might very well embody not just land and productivity, but a landscape alive with divine presence. To extend this understanding of Andean textiles in relation to landscape and then to aspects of divinity, we may also point out that during the Inca period, the Inca rulership chose virgin maidens from across its conquered territories to weave garments both for the state and for the state religion, which were linked since the Inca ruler was considered semi-divine. In this other image by Guamampoma, we see the virgin weavers, called the Akyakuna, spinning fine wool fibers for the elite fabric of the state. Thus, the context of an Inca socio-religious program that preceded the Spanish, and therefore preceded the unknown Virgin Martyr painting, begins to hang its weight on the Virgin Martyr's mysterious woven skirt. I end this paper with one more cultural factor to take into account. Within socio-sacred practices, Andeans connect ideas of earthly fecundity not only to cosmological cycles, but to life cycles directly involving the human experience, specifically in the form of ancestor worship. Upon death, ancestors would often be bundled in cloth as part of the burial practice, and furthermore would be kept in accessible places such as caves or above-ground monuments, so that their bodies could be revisited, reclothed, and communed with regularly. In both these Guamampoma drawings, we see images of the deceased being engaged with socially by their living relatives. Ancestors who were linked to a king group's originary lineage and its originary lands are called Malki, and are seen as a group's protector and as the force that will continue to ensure a group's generative and productive viability. Although the Malki could also be embodied in other natural objects or sites on the landscape, often devotion to the Malki involved veneration of the mummy bundle, layered in multiple traditionally woven textiles. With that in mind, looking again at the unknown Virgin Martyr's woven skirt, are we encountering an aspect of this long-held Andean tradition of ancestor worship? But how can we associate a female saint with Andean ancestor worship that typically involved a male lineage bearer? The Quechua word Malki, in fact, translates as seed. As Carolyn Dean notes, upon death, the nature of a male ancestor as Malki was rendered conceptually female because in its seed-like state, it was seen as dormant, not yet sown, waiting to be acted upon by outside forces, and owing to its inactivity, the Malki was feminized. Though it is not easy to set up this vantage point, it is worth trying to consider the production of cultural meaning in the colonial period as a process of inherent oscillation. Returning to the Virgin Martyr with her textile skirt, we might more easily now recall deceased Andean kin figures who continued to be invested in their communities and vice versa. In the context of a fever to evangelize in the New World and as a strategy of the Counter-Reformation, Spaniards allowed the use of images in the New World because it was thought to be beneficial for conversion. However, as Luisa Elena Alcalá notes, cults arise from particular circumstances and share in local social complexities. Devotional practices could easily escape the control of missionaries and evangelizers. Nonetheless, despite the fact that the Andean textile tradition spans thousands of years and clearly contains rich content from which to draw, there are large gaps in our ability to visualize how native textiles were experienced and worn in the colonial Andes. This is perhaps made more difficult with the insertion of European modes of representation. This painting seems only to add to our quandaries about the colonial space, and yet that is also its virtue, that it duly fragments our understanding of cultural encounter and complicates the scenario further rather than distilling it. Thank you.